A hush fell over the crowded church. Hearts trembled, eyes widened, and then conviction fell without a single sermon. Something unseen, unstoppable, moved through the crowd, leaving people changed forever. What was this secret power? How could it sweep through souls without words? In this video, we uncover the story of Duncan Campbell, the revivalist whose ministry defied explanation and shook entire congregations. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and share this video, because the story you're about to witness is not just history, it's a revelation you won't forget. There are moments in history that defy explanation, moments that cannot be rehearsed, planned, or scripted, moments when something unseen moves through a place, touching hearts and minds in ways that leave people forever changed. This is one of those moments. Imagine a crowded church. Hundreds of people have gathered, eager to hear the word, yet tonight there would be no sermon, no carefully crafted message, no prepared speech, just anticipation. And then something extraordinary happened. A hush fell over the room. People shifted in their seats, eyes scanning the dimly lit hall. The air seemed to thrum with electricity, not from lights or sound, but from a presence that could not be measured. And then, without warning, conviction began to fall, not through words, but through something far more powerful, something unseen. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room. Men and women, young and old, felt a weight pressing upon their hearts. Some sank to their knees, some clutched their chests, tears streaming down their faces. And yet, no sermon had been delivered. No one had shouted, no one had called them forward. It was as if the Spirit itself had swept through, touching lives in a way that words could never reach. Duncan Campbell, the man at the center of it all, stood quietly. His eyes, focused and unwavering, seemed to see beyond the room, beyond the crowd, into something higher. Yet even he could not have fully anticipated the response. What was about to unfold would shock, inspire, and confound even the most seasoned observers of revival. And then, something no one could explain happened. People began to tremble, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, more profound, a sense of guilt, of realization, of divine confrontation. Some described it as a lightning strike of awareness, hitting their souls directly. Others felt a warmth, almost a glow, spreading from their hearts outward. Whispered prayers rose spontaneously, not guided by a preacher, but compelled by something invisible. Those who witnessed it later said it was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Children who had been restless moments before fell silent, tears in their eyes. Elderly members wept freely, unable to contain the power that seemed to envelop the room. And still, no sermon had been preached. What witnesses described next would become the most talked about part of his ministry. Even the skeptics could not deny it. Some said it was mass hysteria. Others claimed it was suggestion or trickery. But those in the room knew something far greater had touched them, something secret, something undeniable. The power that night was real, it was raw, it was transformative. And yet, for many who left that hall, the mystery only deepened. How could conviction fall without a single word spoken? How could lives be changed so profoundly, so immediately, without a sermon to guide them? This question would follow Duncan Campbell for the rest of his ministry, haunting his critics, inspiring believers, and leaving a mark on countless lives. But tonight, we step inside that mystery. We follow the footsteps of a man who would witness the secret power of God moving through a crowd without preaching a single word. And as we do, you will see why this night, this power would shock a nation and leave a legacy that still echoes decades later. The lights dim, the pews sit silent, yet the air remains charged. Somewhere, beyond the visible, beyond the human understanding, something waits to move again. And what happened in that church would never be forgotten. Duncan Campbell was born in 1908 in a small Scottish town, a place where the church was often the center of life and community. Yet from the beginning, his journey was not conventional. He grew up surrounded by the routines of Sunday services, prayers, and hymns, but something deeper stirred within him, a quiet hunger for something beyond the ordinary. As a young boy, Duncan was fascinated by stories of revival. He would read about preachers who saw extraordinary things happen in their congregations, accounts of hearts being touched in ways that could not be explained by words alone. And in those stories, he sensed a calling, a pull toward the kind of ministry that could change lives in ways he could not yet fully understand. But what happened during his early days of ministry would shock even those closest to him. His first experiences preaching were humble. He spoke to small congregations, often in chilly, dimly lit halls, with only a handful of attendees. And yet, even then, there were whispers. People felt moved, sometimes overwhelmed, not because of the eloquence of his words, but because of a presence in the room. Something unseen seemed to accompany him, stirring the hearts of those who listened. Duncan Campbell's ministry was not built on charisma or spectacle. It was rooted in prayer, in deep personal devotion, and in an unwavering faith that God could move beyond the constraints of sermons or carefully arranged services. His early mentors noticed something unusual about him. He would often pray late into the night, seeking guidance, and many remarked that even as a young preacher, he carried a weight of responsibility far beyond his years. And then came the first hints of what would later become his signature ministry, the power to provoke conviction without a single sermon. Campbell's reputation began to grow slowly. Word spread that gatherings he led often produced extraordinary responses. Congregants described moments where guilt, repentance, and awe swept through the room spontaneously. People would leave transformed, tears streaming down their faces, hearts opened in ways they could scarcely describe. And the most remarkable part? Duncan would often speak very little. Sometimes he didn't preach at all, yet the room would change. This wasn't magic, it wasn't trickery, it was something deeper, a spiritual force that seemed to bypass the intellect and touch something essential in the human soul. Those who witnessed it often struggled to find words. They spoke of warmth, weight, presence, or even fire, but no single description captured the experience. And then, what witnesses saw one night would challenge everything people thought they knew about revival. Duncan's approach was simple, yet radical. He believed that God could convict hearts without him delivering a single sermon. He spent hours in prayer, sometimes days preparing spiritually rather than mentally for a message. The power, he believed, came from aligning himself completely with the divine will. In interviews later in life, he would often emphasize that his role was not to command or instruct, but to open a channel for God to move freely. His personal life mirrored his ministry. Duncan was known for humility, for genuine compassion, and for his insistence on integrity. He avoided flamboyance and the trappings of fame. Instead, he focused on preparation, prayer, and an unshakable faith that revival was not about him, it was about the Spirit moving through the people. But not everyone welcomed this unusual method. As his reputation spread, so did skepticism. Some ministers questioned the validity of what he did. How could conviction fall without words? Was it genuine? Was it manipulation? These questions would follow him throughout his career, often fueling controversy. Yet those who were there, those whose lives were changed, knew the truth. Something profound, something real was happening. By the 1930s, Duncan Campbell was beginning to conduct large-scale revival meetings. The gatherings drew people from miles around, curious, skeptical, and hopeful. And in those early nights, the pattern was established. Hearts were moved, conviction fell spontaneously, tears flowed freely, and the room, the crowd, and even Duncan himself were often overwhelmed by what he witnessed. What happened in these early nights of ministry would set the stage for the most extraordinary revival events of his life. This was a man who had experienced the ordinary rhythms of small-town Scotland, yet was being called to witness something extraordinary, a force that would transcend sermons, defy expectation, and leave a mark on the history of revival that no one could ignore. And as the years went on, that power, that mysterious ability to move hearts without preaching, would become Duncan Campbell's defining hallmark, a secret force that would shake churches, stir hearts, and create a legacy that would endure for generations. The night was unlike any other. People had gathered from all corners, traveling by foot, by train, by carriage, desperate to witness something they could not fully name. There was excitement, curiosity, and a deep, almost tangible expectation hanging in the air. And yet, no one could anticipate the force that would move through that room. Duncan Campbell stepped onto the platform, his eyes scanning the congregation. He did not speak at first. Instead, he stood quietly, hands clasped, praying silently. The murmurs of the crowd faded, as if a veil had dropped over the room. The tension was electric. And then it began, something no one could have predicted. It started subtly, a tremor in the chest, a sharp awareness in the mind. People shifted in their seats, uneasy yet unable to look away. Children stopped fidgeting, elders held their breath, and then it hit. Conviction fell, not through words, not through preaching, but through presence. One witness described it as a weight pressing upon the heart, heavy and undeniable, making it impossible to ignore sin, fear, and doubt. Others spoke of warmth, light, or even a fire-like sensation that seemed to flow through the pews, touching every soul in the room. But what happened next would shock everyone, even those who had come expecting the miraculous. Without a single sermon, people began to cry out. Some fell to their knees, trembling. Others clutched their chests, tears streaming freely. Families embraced, strangers wept together, and a hush of awe fell over the room. It was chaotic, yet orderly, a spiritual tension that could only be described as divine. Duncan Campbell walked slowly among the crowd, his presence quiet but potent. He did not call people forward. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he allowed the Spirit to work unimpeded, moving silently through each person, each heart, each life. And then, something no one could explain happened. Suddenly, a young man in the front row who had arrived skeptical and defiant slumped forward, overcome by what he later described as an invisible force of truth. He wept openly, his pride and doubts melting away in the presence of something far greater than human understanding. Witnesses around him gasped, recognizing the unmistakable hand of God at work. The night stretched on. Moments of quiet prayer were interspersed with waves of emotion. Some people shouted praises spontaneously. Others whispered prayers they didn't know they carried in their hearts. It was unpredictable, unrepeatable, and unstoppable. And through it all, Duncan remained calm, his faith the anchor amid the storm of spiritual awakening. But the most remarkable part of the night was yet to come. As the evening deepened, the room became almost surreal. People reported visions, flashes of light, a sensation of being lifted, a sense of divine presence that words could not describe. Those who had attended hundreds of revivals admitted they had never experienced anything like it. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, said one elder. Every shadow, every flicker of light carried the weight of God. The crowd swelled with anticipation. Every face in the hall bore the mark of expectation, and every heart beat in unison with a force unseen. And then, in a wave, conviction fell across the room. People who doubted, resisted, or ignored the call of faith found themselves powerless to resist. Knees hit the floor, hands rose involuntarily, tears flowed in a river of surrender. What witnesses experienced that night would be spoken of for decades. Amid the intensity, Duncan Campbell moved among the crowd, offering quiet words of encouragement, brief prayers, and a presence that was both humble and commanding. He never preached a sermon, he never raised his voice in authority, and yet the results were undeniable. People left the hall that night changed forever. Some healed, some awakened, some transformed in ways that defied explanation. The power at work was subtle yet overwhelming. It bypassed intellect, bypassed expectation, and entered straight into the soul. Those present would later describe it as a force that compelled honesty, repentance, and awe. You couldn't resist it, one attendee recalled. It wasn't fear, it wasn't coercion, it was something higher, something divine. And even as the night ended, the echoes of what had happened lingered in every heart. By the time the crowd dispersed, dawn was approaching. People left in silence, some weeping, some laughing with relief, and many unable to articulate what had just occurred. The streets were quiet, but inside every soul there was a fire, a spark ignited by the secret power that had moved through that room without a single sermon. Those who were skeptical before the night could not deny it afterward. Something had happened, something extraordinary, something that could not be explained by human reasoning alone. And Duncan Campbell, quiet yet present, had been the conduit for a force that shook the church and forever changed the lives of all who were present. And this was only the beginning of what would become a ministry known for the miraculous, the unexplainable, and the divine. The night remained etched in memory. Stories spread to neighboring towns and eventually across the country. People traveled from far and wide to witness what they could not understand. And each time Duncan entered a hall, hearts prepared themselves, anticipating the invisible hand of conviction. By the end of that night, one truth was undeniable. Sermons could instruct, speeches could inspire, but there existed a power beyond words, a force that touched the soul directly. And that force, that secret, had revealed itself fully through Duncan Campbell, forever cementing his place in the history of revival. For every soul that left transformed, there were those who questioned what had occurred. Not everyone was ready to accept the inexplicable power that moved through Duncan Campbell's meetings. Critics emerged quickly, questioning the validity, the methods, and even the man himself. Some accused him of theatricality. Others suggested psychological manipulation. How, they asked, could conviction fall without a sermon? Was it suggestion, mass hysteria, or just the power of expectation? These were serious questions, and they fueled debates in churches and homes alike. But what witnesses insisted made skeptics reconsider everything they thought they knew. Eyewitness accounts were consistent. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs described moments of profound awareness and surrender. Children, adults, and elders alike reacted spontaneously to a force that could not be measured or explained. Skeptics had to admit something beyond normal human influence was at work, yet doubt persisted. Newspaper articles sensationalized the events. Headlines ranged from mass hysteria at revival to miracle or myth. The debates were heated. Some religious leaders praised Campbell's work as a genuine movement of God. Others warned congregations to be cautious, calling it dangerous or deceptive. And then, some of the accusations struck even closer to home, challenging his very character. Rumors circulated that Campbell sought fame or profit from his ministry. Letters to editors questioned his integrity. Detractors scrutinized his every movement. But those who knew him personally, who had walked alongside him through countless revival nights, testified that his life reflected humility, prayer, and dedication rather than self-interest. The controversy was not merely about methodology, it was about power. People feared what they could not understand. A man who could provoke conviction without a sermon threatened long-held assumptions about authority, tradition, and control in the church. And in that fear, debate and dissent flourished. What happened next would deepen the controversy even further. As Campbell's ministry grew, so did public attention. Crowds swelled, and with them, more eyes of skepticism. Scholars, clergy, and journalists attended services, documenting what they saw. While some were convinced, others left unconvinced, searching for rational explanations. Yet the undeniable truth remained. Lives were being changed. Skepticism could not erase transformation. Some accused attendees of exaggeration, claiming stories were embellished to create spectacle. But when multiple independent sources described similar experiences, tears, trembling, visions, spontaneous prayer, it became increasingly difficult to dismiss the events as mere coincidence. And still, the most shocking aspects of Campbell's ministry continued to challenge perception. Beyond the public debate, internal tension existed within the church. Ministers who adhered strictly to sermons and doctrine struggled to reconcile spontaneous conviction with traditional practices. Some feared that such displays could undermine established authority or control. Others, however, recognized a genuine movement of the Spirit, one that transcended protocol and touched hearts in ways textbooks never could. Despite controversy, Campbell never wavered. He embraced scrutiny as part of his calling. In interviews, he often stated, "God's work will always challenge human understanding. It is not mine to explain fully, only to witness faithfully." His calm response to criticism only intensified curiosity and drew more observers to witness the phenomenon firsthand. And then came the question that haunted every discussion. Was this truly divine or something else entirely? This debate persisted throughout his career. Conferences, interviews, and even informal gatherings were arenas of discussion. Each testimony added weight to the mystery, while each skeptical critique fueled continued curiosity. People were captivated, divided, and compelled, exactly as revival often is. Yet for those who had experienced conviction firsthand, skepticism mattered little. They had felt the invisible force, the undeniable touch of something beyond comprehension. For them, words, arguments, and newspaper articles could never replicate the experience. And so, the controversy itself became part of the story, highlighting the tension between human reasoning and spiritual experience. By the end of these debates, one truth emerged clearly. Duncan Campbell had done something rare, something extraordinary. He had provoked conviction without a sermon, stirred hearts without words, and created a movement that challenged both belief and disbelief. The controversy, rather than diminishing his impact, only magnified it, drawing more attention, more seekers, and more conversations about the invisible power at work. It was a reminder that spiritual transformation often comes with conflict. Where human understanding ends, mystery begins. And in that space, Duncan Campbell's ministry thrived, leaving an indelible mark on history and paving the way for generations to witness the secret power that shook the church. Duncan Campbell's ministry left a mark that time cannot erase. Decades after those first nights of conviction falling without a sermon, people still speak of the moments when hearts were touched in ways words could never explain. His work did not end with a single revival, a single city, or a single congregation. It resonated across nations, inspiring countless believers and seekers alike. The secret power that moved through him became a symbol, a reminder that divine influence cannot be confined by tradition or expectation. People came to understand that sermons may teach, words may inspire, but true transformation, real soul-deep change can come without them. It comes when the Spirit moves freely, unbound and unstoppable. And yet, some of the most powerful stories of his legacy are not found in books or sermons, but in the lives he touched. Stories poured in from every corner, men who had walked away from faith, returning to it with hearts full of humility, families reunited in love and forgiveness, communities transformed by repentance and revival. Duncan's influence extended far beyond the walls of the church. Those who experienced his ministry carried the spark of conviction into their homes, workplaces, and neighborhoods, spreading a ripple of spiritual awakening that continues to this day. And what happened decades later would only confirm that the power he demonstrated was no mere coincidence. Even after his passing, testimonies continued. People recounted moments where they felt conviction fall upon them in churches they attended, revivals they joined, or even personal prayers at home. They spoke of the invisible hand of God working quietly yet powerfully, just as it had through Duncan Campbell. The lessons of his ministry were clear. Humility, devotion, and alignment with the Spirit can move hearts in ways beyond human understanding. His approach remains a model for modern revivalists. Preachers and leaders study his methods, not for technique or theatrics, but for the principle that transformation is not about control, it is about surrender. He demonstrated that when one yields fully to divine purpose, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the invisible becomes undeniably real. And then, the question arises, what can we learn from a ministry that defied convention yet changed countless lives? The answer lies in faith and observation. Duncan Campbell showed that miracles are not always loud, nor must they be orchestrated. Sometimes the most profound movements of God occur quietly, invisibly, yet with power that touches everything it encounters. His life reminds us that spiritual authority is not measured by eloquence, popularity, or spectacle, but by the ability to channel a higher purpose faithfully. Even today, revival meetings inspired by Campbell's example continue to draw people hungry for genuine transformation. And though each gathering is unique, the underlying truth remains the same: a heart fully surrendered, a congregation fully open, and a spirit freely moving can produce results that surpass expectation. And so, the legacy of Duncan Campbell is not only measured by the revivals he led, but by the countless souls forever changed by his ministry. As we reflect on his life, one thing becomes clear: conviction can fall without a sermon, hearts can awaken without instruction, and divine power can move freely when human ego steps aside. What he accomplished cannot be reduced to events or statistics. It lives in the personal stories, the tears, the laughter, and the renewed faith of every person who encountered that secret, unstoppable force. Tonight, when we remember Duncan Campbell, we remember more than a man. We remember a ministry that showed us the extraordinary potential of surrender. We remember a church shaken not by words, but by the undeniable power of God. And we remember the lesson that continues to echo across generations. True spiritual transformation transcends explanation, defies expectation, and touches every soul willing to receive it. And so, the secret power that shook the church lives on, not in headlines, not in sermons, but in hearts forever changed, in lives that continue to testify, and in the quiet, unstoppable work of the Spirit. The secret power that shook the church lives on, not in words, but in hearts transformed and lives forever changed. Duncan Campbell showed that true spiritual awakening often defies expectation, moves silently, and touches the soul in ways nothing else can. As you reflect on his story, ask yourself, what moments in your life have challenged your understanding? Where have you felt something beyond explanation? If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone seeking inspiration. Drop your thoughts below. Your reflections could spark someone else's awakening.